Project managers, have you ever felt like you should get that promotion or a better job? Start a business. Write that book. Have you ever felt you were made for more but didn't know where to start?
Welcome to the PM for the Masses podcast with your host, Caesar Abaid.
Learn from the experts. Think outside the box. Have a voice, network, and be extraordinary.
PM for the Masses podcast.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm Caesar Abaid, your host, and this show, again, is your regular reminder that your career matters more than your job and that your life is a project and you are the manager. Whether you work for a company or for yourself, your job stability is really just your ability to land your next gig. So, join me in practicing intentional, planned, and value-adding relevance, starting right now. Today, we're going to talk about strategic thinking, and this topic has been, I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where let's say you go and buy a blue Honda, for example, and then all of a sudden you're driving around and all you see are blue Hondas, right? This has come up for me a couple of years ago that it would be interesting for me to develop my strategic thinking. And ever since then, this topic has been hitting me from all directions. I've had coworkers mention this. I've had my team lead at the time mention this to me. I've had books that I saw and read about this, and then when Greg Githens, our guest today, contacted me about being on the show, out of the blue, I had talked to him a couple of years ago, and it didn't work out to have him as a guest back then. But just out of the blue, he sends me a message, say, "Hey, do you still want to do the podcast and on this topic?" And then I just couldn't believe it. Here he goes again. Strategic thinking and strategy. So I went ahead and read his book, and it made a huge impact on me. And you'll see in my conversation with him that follows this introduction that hopefully you can see it in my voice that this really appealed to me. And I think that this is something that project managers in particular would benefit from developing. I think we like to think that we are strategic thinkers and that managing projects requires strategy, which it does. But this is bigger than that. And I think if you do read this book, you will understand why. I really recommend it. And I'll have links to where you can get this book and other resources during the conversation here, and also at pmforthemasses.com/135, which is the episode number for this release. It's hard to explain because strategy is not a linear process, right? So it is by definition complex, and it's not something that can be explained. First you do this, then you do that, then you do the other. It's not a waterfall process. So I really recommend you take a listen today and then go check out his book and see if it appeals to you. I think it was so impactful to me that it's going to direct most of my focus for this year of 2021. This is how much and how important this was to me. So let's talk about today's guest. Greg Githens is an executive coach, seminar leader, keynote speaker, and a management consultant with work experience on 6 continents. His audiences and clients include Essilor of America, Ecom Group, VR Systems, Weber Stevens, PetSmart, United Healthcare, the University of Toledo, the Andersons, Bryan Healthcare, and the American Red Cross, as well as 3M, IBM, and the U.S. Air Force. The most important tool is the one between your ears. This is an idea that informs much of his teaching in his writing and also the advice that he gives. He has authored numerous articles on strategic thinking, strategic initiatives, innovation, program delivery, and new product development. He holds a master's degree in business administration from Bowling Green State University, a master's degree from Miami University, and a bachelor's degree from the Ohio State University. He also holds the project management professional certification. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
I'm good, Caesar. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Likewise, I want to start by saying that this book kicked my butt. And that's how I've been describing this to people. And I've shared the book with my coworkers and my friends, because it really, really challenged me. And I like to think that I was, a strategic thinker. I really think about my career, and I'm a book author, and I do this podcast, and I do all these different things that in my mind have been strategic or whatever, right? But as I'm reading your book, I'm realizing that that's not at all, like, thinking strategically is not at all the way that I think most of the time. And it came to me. I told you when we first met that this is very timely for me right now in the place that I am in my career, in my life. The word strategy has been hitting me from all corners, and I got your book and I read it, and it's like, oh my word, it's all marked up, it's all highlighted, and it's gonna stay on my desk. That's how much I liked it.
Thank you. That's quite a compliment. I've heard a lot of good things and received a lot of good book reviews, which I think all of your listeners can, if they want to check it out, just see the nice reviews that you'll find there on Amazon. So that's a real nice one. I'm glad, because I want to make impact on others, positive impact on others.
Mm-hmm. Well, you did. So let me start with a quote from your book, if that's okay.
Yes.
And it goes like this, quote, "To learn to think strategically is not an exercise in rote memorization. It's not stuffing your memory with a stack of facts about strategic frameworks and best practices. Instead, you cultivate an enthusiasm for the undiscovered and novel. You're optimistic that someone can find a better way of doing things, and you know that step jumps can be better than incremental improvement. Start by emptying your mind of preconceptions and recognize the presence of ambiguity." And I think this is everything else in the book can relate back to this quote. And I wanted to ask you from the beginning then, what is strategy and what is not strategy?
Okay. Yeah, that is a good place to start. So if you were to go onto Wikipedia, you would find lots and lots of definitions of strategy, and some are very much tailored towards business, and some are military oriented. There's even a term called grand strategy, which talks about how nation states compete with each other in a global stage. So what I use as a definition of strategy is something that I believe that can fit for anyone, whether you're a project manager, a school administrator, military person, or whatever. And here's what my definition is. I go, strategy is a specialized tool used to advance the interests of the organization by managing issues that have broad and long-term impact. And then if you like, I can kind of unpack those things. Please. But basically, you can simplify that statement to say strategy is a kind of specialized problem solving. Okay.
And I think, yes, that's great. And I think it's even the initial definition that you share is, you can find that all over the book. Well, the issue that I had, going into this book, and what really started to unpack things for me is the notion that I was thinking strategically in my life already, but I really wasn't, right? You compare strategy to an art more than a process, more about learning than knowing. So there's all these. It's very, very non-linear, the way that you describe this, and it's one of the reasons I had a hard time coming up with questions and how to direct this interview, because by making my tendency is always to go to process, right? Like, how can I make this as linear and as step by step as possible for folks? But that's the wrong approach, isn't it?
Well, process has its place, and structured problem solving has its place. And I think one important thing for everyone to recognize, and I think this is a big contribution of the book, is that I spend some time talking about operations and distinguishing operations from strategy. So operations means to work within the existing business model. And the primary concerns of an operational thinker are more around efficiency, productivity, predictability, and it's according to that. That's what brings us into process, is the aspirations to do that. But then we look around out in the outside world and we find all these organizations trying to optimize their process and optimize their operations. And their competition is just destroying them, because what's also built into operations is we accidentally allow status quo thinking to come in. So as many of my colleagues who sit on boards of directors of organizations, they like to stress that operations is working in the business and strategy is working on the business. And so to encourage people to be strategic thinkers, what I do is I point out 3 landmarks on the map of strategic thinking. And those 3 landmarks are the core challenge. The core challenge is the answer to this question. What's the biggest challenge your organization faces that it can do something about? And coming up with the answer to that question requires a lot of work, a lot of thought, a lot of conversation, a lot of investigation. Another landmark is the future, because the decisions we make today bear their consequences in the future. And again, we tend to be status quo oriented. The third major landmark on the map of strategic thinking is insights. And I like to say that insights are the secret sauce of strategy. Mm-hmm. That's where in our minds we come up with a reframing, a better understanding of what's going on around us. So, you're so correct that we have so many people that are very linear thinkers. That linear thinking basically means that the relationship between cause and effect are close in time and apparent to anybody. And non-linear thinking really means that although there's still a cause-effect relationship, there's a larger period of time and there's multiple things that can cause a given effect. So it's not quite so tightly linked when we talk about cause and effect. And so I think that's a big challenge for people, but it's a growth challenge. And poses a lot of opportunity. So I think, a lot of project managers are saying to themselves, I've mastered the project management piece. I've got the methodology. I've got all that. And they're saying, so what's my next opportunity? What's next for me? And, I think it's one of the challenges of personal growth for all of us is that a lot of times we have to learn to forget the things that made us successful. Or maybe I would rephrase it, is that we have to broaden our understanding of the world around us to say that the tools we use are very, very situational. That's why I define strategy as a specialized tool. You don't use strategy for everything, but there's certain times and places for organizations when strategy is really appropriate. And then again, it's just kind of a different way of looking at things, but anybody can think of strategically and should think strategically. And I think one of the reasons that your listenership should be really interested in this is that strategic thinking is rare. And if you're seen as a strategic thinker, it's great for your career.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and that's why it's so appealing to me, because I'm speaking very honestly about myself here. I feel like this is a skill set that I need to develop more, and your book just really opened up my mind to all sorts of different things, and I'm reading other things now because of it. But yeah, I really like, and I was going to ask you about that later, but we can talk about that right now. The difference between operational thinking and strategic thinking, and. You mentioned project management, that's falls square into operations, right? Even though I've always distinguished project work from operational work, but a project as a unit is in my mind now, after reading this and reading other things, a project as a unit with outside of the context of strategy becomes an operation bit, basically. And in the way that I was thinking about this, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but strategic thinking is what happens in between operational sprints, right? So you have a quarter where you set up to do these projects and these goals, and you put your head down, into your laptop, and you work that with your team with that short-term goal in mind, and you focus on that. But then when that's done and you need to think about, okay, what am I going to work on next? That's when strategy should come in heavily. Does that resonate?
Parts of it does, but I would like to back up a little bit. And so, we talk a lot in project management about portfolio management. So here's where I'm going to disagree with you. Mm-hmm. Many of our projects, but certainly not all, support running the business. They support the operations of the business. They support the productivity and getting things out the door. But also, many of the projects that we work on are strategic projects in the sense that they are there to change the business model. They are there to help move the business into a better fit with where everything is evolving in its industry or in its external environment. So I think one of the important lessons for every project manager, every program manager, every portfolio manager is that you really need to know why your project exists. And is it to support strategic change? That means change to the business model that's helping it move to a new and different place. Or is it just supporting running the existing business, keeping the lights on, and so forth? One of the ways that you can tell an operational type project is an operational thinking. This is what I call the 5 Ps of operational thinking. The first 3 Ps are aspirations of operational thinkers, and the first one's productivity. So if your project is helping the organization churn out or develop or deliver more of its core product, whatever it does, insurance policies, whatever it may be, then chances are you're looking at productivity and efficiency. The next P is perfection. So if you're really concerned in your project about not making mistakes and errors, or maybe the focus of the project is to drive down the error rate or improve the quality of your organization, that's around the P of perfection. The third P is on predictability. It's something akin to the timing. So operational projects tend to pay more attention to calendar time. And there's a contrast there with strategic projects. You're going to find that in projects connected to strategy, timing isn't as important as is the delivery of benefits. You'll find in strategic projects people saying it will take as long as it needs to take because it's more important to get it right than to do it fast. So I'll just back up for a second. There's 5 Ps of operational thinking. The first 3 are aspirational. They are productivity, perfection, and predictability. The fourth P is process. And the reason that organizations develop process is to try to create an institutional response to everybody's desire for productivity, predictability, and perfection. So process is the fourth P. The fifth P is the present. And what I'm really saying there is that all of this work within the operation consumes so much of our mental energy that we don't have time to think about anything else. So this explains why we criticize people for having short-term thinking, why we find it really, really difficult to step back and try to see the big picture, is that all of our mental energy is being consumed with just the stuff that is part of the operations of the organization. And obviously, it's really important to do the operational work of your organization. That's how you serve your customers. That's how you scale up. That's how you do all the important things that your organization needs to do. But this is where the strategy piece comes in, is that if we keep focusing on doing the things that we're presently doing now, only doing them more efficiently and better, if we're in a competitive environment, our competition is going to figure out a way to leapfrog us. And for those that are not in, not-for-profit organizations or whatever, we get surprised when events change around us, such as pandemics occur. Mm-hmm. So we have to help people do both well. Operational thinking is incredibly important, but we need to find ways to cleave up time to spend some time on the strategic thinking map. And I think an important part of the self-discipline that we have to develop is to discipline ourselves to shift our energy in a way that's a little bit out of our operational comfort zone.
So let me take a minute to talk about my favorite remote collaborating tool. It's called MindMeister, and it's a mind mapping application. MindMeister is a completely web-based mind mapping software that runs in any standard web browser. So the mind maps you create are saved automatically in the cloud online and can be accessed from anywhere. If you don't know what a mind map is, think of it as a free-flowing visual outline tool that can be used for anything you want. So I've been using MindMeister for 10 years now. It is by far my favorite tool for organizing my thoughts, for sharing my thoughts with my team, and also for collaborating with other people. So, for example, it is a perfect tool for you to create a WBS, a work breakdown structure. It's beautifully laid out, it's all online, and it's a wonderful company. So aside from the web app, MindMeister also offers native mobile apps for iPhone, iPad, even Apple Watch and Android devices, which means that you can access, edit, and present your maps no matter where you are. MindMeister was made as intuitive and as fast as possible to ensure that you can fully concentrate on the creative task at hand. So there's no clutter, no friction, just your team and your ideas. And speaking of teams, unlike traditional mind mapping tools, MindMeister lets you brainstorm in real time with an unlimited number of users. So I do this all the time. I'll brainstorm something by myself using a mind map, and then I share that with my coworkers who are far away, and they hop in and they help me out with brainstorming and moving things around. It's really cool. And MindMeister has a special code that will give you a 10% discount for my audience. If you go to pmforthemasses.com/mindmap, pmforthemasses.com/mindmap, if you sign up for any of the paid accounts, you can put in the code MASSES, as in PM for the Masses, so MASSES, and you'll get 10% off. And you don't even need to upgrade to a paid plan because MindMeister offers a free plan that it's a bit limited, but you can try it out. And then if you like it and you want to upgrade, you can use that code. That's a great way for you to get started. And if you do upgrade, it's a great way to support this podcast. And also, you will let them know, the folks at MindMeister, that you heard about MindMeister here on the PM for the Masses podcast. So again, pmforthemasses.com/mindmap and enter the code MASSES for 10% off. Now back to the show. Thank you for that. That's all, those listening right now, this is all explaining the book in detail with charts and everything. And I think, one thing that came to mind as you were describing this is the role of the project, or the role of a leader. Not, maybe you are a project manager, maybe you're not listening right now, but in understanding where your project fits within the strategy, right, or not, and communicate that to the team, so they too understand. And I find that kind of communication to the team, like, why is it that what we're doing is important, and here's where it fits in our strategy, right? Tend to pull people up to a higher level of thinking, and I think it creates less stress, and people are more resilient to changes, like you said, because hey, maybe the how we get about this is not that important as long as we do it. Yeah. When there's a change in process that is pushed down from above, then people are less likely to feel stressed about that, because, well, that's just a difference in the how, not in the what, right? But I think it's on the leader to keep that perspective clear for the team.
Yeah, you're so right. So this question of why are we doing this, or why is this project important, I think is a very, very important question that many people want to know within the project team, because you'll often find, this goes back to ambiguity, that if you're in an ambiguous situation, knowing the reason why helps you to better select the kinds of methods that you want to use for that particular situation. So I think that's incredibly important. And it's especially important when we're dealing with the kinds of projects and programs and the kinds of things that are trying to put the organization in a better fit with its changing external environment. And again, it keeps coming back to that idea of ambiguity. The essential nature of strategy is that it is ambiguous. But people don't like ambiguity. Ambiguity makes people feel uncomfortable. So this goes back to what we need to learn how to do as individuals is first off to recognize what ambiguity is, and then to learn to tolerate that ambiguity. Thirdly, to manage the ambiguity. And then here, this is really cool. Fourthly, is to exploit the ambiguity. A lot of times in competitive situations, if we can create ambiguity for our competitor, they don't know where we're trying to go with our projects or organizations or whatever it is. We create a kind of ambiguity that gives our organization an advantage. So I really do believe that one of the important things that everybody needs to understand is have an appreciation of what ambiguity is, because it's all around us. It makes us feel uncomfortable. But as I said just a moment ago, strategy is essentially ambiguous. And it's just getting our arms around that is one of the tough challenges for every individual.
Mm-hmm. On that note, I see a bit of a vicious circle in organizations, people I talk to, and from my own experience as well, in which there's a very well-intentioned attempt to remove ambiguity for folks by creating processes, right? And so they can, quote, focus on their job and not be worried about things that are maybe beyond their control and things like that, which is a good intention. But what happens over time is that it deprives teams from developing that skill of dealing and working within an ambiguous environment. So, is this ring true to you? And what do you say to that? What's an advice that you would have?
Oh, I think absolutely so. So for very well-meaning reasons, organizations set themselves up to remove ambiguity. And they create processes. Processes is a great way to drive out ambiguity. But then, often the processes are, put cement all over the whole thing. And of course, I think we all know this, is that as our business models change, our processes have to change, which means that a lot of times we have to re-engineer and break up our processes, which means that we're introducing ambiguity back into it. So I think it's just part of personal growth to say that that I have to recognize these discomforts. As I often say to classes that I teach, is that learning should be safe, but it doesn't have to be comfortable. So it's important for all of us to recognize that we have a comfort zone, that we want to step out of our comfort zone into our learning zone, but not into the panic zone. And I think that's one of the things that the people in a leadership kind of position can help people to do is let's not worry about people complaining about the discomforts that they have. Learning is uncomfortable. Strategy is uncomfortable. Change is uncomfortable. So let's not worry about making it easier on people, but let's recognize that we can, that there is this panic zone thing where people, if you push them too far and too far out there, that they are going to freeze up.
Yeah, it's tough to do that without losing compassion, right? Or coming across as cold-hearted. Basically, hey, it's good for you. Like drink up this thing.
Yeah, tough love.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
But so yeah, I guess that's a challenge for everybody listening right now. Think about your teams.
Think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it goes back to having some psychological safety, and recognizing that safety and comfort are two different things. That if we want to grow, we have to experience discomfort.
Yeah, that's great. I like that distinction there. Safety and comfort are two different things. Okay. You talk about one of the skills like being aware of weak signals and that we get signals from everywhere, right? And this is what when I think of my job as a lead, it's something that I feel like it's a lot under my control for the team. Like what signals to boost for them, so as to maybe improve the chances of a positive narrative in their minds about what's happening to the organization and to the market. But I think as you mentioned, this is about thinking strategically is a personal skill. So I think folks need to develop that individually as well. So how do we know when to ignore a signal or when to take action on them? Like how basically judge its importance?
Oh, that's a really tough question. That is a really, really difficult question. So there's a concept that we can pull out from, national intelligence, and actually we can find it in science. It's about sensitivity and specificity. So if you kind of imagine two different dials, the sensitivity dial says if we dial up our sensitivity, we are more alert to weak signals. But sometimes these weak signals are just false positives. They don't tell us anything useful. And of course, we become information overloaded. If we try to read and digest everything in the daily paper, it would just drive us nuts to try to do that. But on the other hand, embedded in that, there are important things that somehow have to pass through. So the other dial we have to work is the dial called specificity. Is this specific to us? Is this relevant to us? Does it have meaning to us in some kind of way? And so what the early part of strategy, I call it the fuzzy front end of strategy, is really about sensing and sense making. So good strategic thinkers are curious and they're sharp. They're always paying attention to their external environment. So the practical advice for listeners is things like listen to things that are and read newspapers and magazines and read things that are outside of your industry, but also look at things that are happening with your own industry and reach out within your own organization and understand what other departments within the organization are doing and what they're concerned with. So we really just need to get our heads up and start looking a little bit more broadly. We also need to think long term or think about the future. I believe that we're heading into a decade of jaw-dropping change. I think if you feel that there's been a lot of change even in the last year, I think the 10 years to come, we are just going to be mind-boggled with the kinds of different things that are coming our way. So this idea of sensing and sense-making and trying to cope with all this is just one of the reasons that we need a lot of people involved. We need to have a culture in our organization that allows us to talk about the things that we see and then come together organizationally to say, you know what, we sense a discontinuity out there. It's not even a trend that other people are looking at, but here's a discontinuity, and this discontinuity might have big effects to us. So what could we do to anticipate the second and third order consequences of that and do some action around it? And the answers might be, let's do a pilot project. Let's go out and run some experiments to see if we can find something within this emerging data packet to see if it really does affect us. And it might turn out that we'll come up with an experiment that tells us important new things that might be a major change in direction for the organization. But it might be just the opposite. It might just say, that was just a false positive. It's really not going to make a difference for us. So I think an important piece that we're going to see a lot in our organizations in the coming decade is we're going to see more recognition of experiments, more willingness to put probes out there to see what kind of feedback that we get from the probes, knowing that not everything is going to work out well. And so the idea here is that we've been locked into an old paradigm called fail-safe design. We're trying to design organizations that are fail-safe. And here's what we want to shift our thinking towards, and it's safe to fail experiments. We want to try doing more things, but there are low risk kinds of things, but a plentitude of them, if you will. And if the experiment doesn't turn out, it's okay. We learned something. And that's a shift in mindset that I'm convinced we're going to see in successful companies and organizations in the coming years. And that if you look at your traditional hierarchical, bureaucratic kinds of organizations that try to treat themselves like a machine, they're saying, well, isn't doing all of these experiments, isn't that wasteful? Isn't that inefficient? Those are going to be the ones that I think are going to be left behind. I think that the future belongs to organizations who are agile, and agile organizations are going to be organizations that experiment better. And where are those experiments? They're projects.
Right. Yeah, there are a lot of things that came to mind as you're describing all this. But one thing that kept coming up to me, because I went to school for electrical engineering, right? So my mind tend to go to math. And, you mentioned in the book, and you can see, in other places as well, that reality is complex. And just like in calculus, typically the more complex the equation is, the chances are there are more solutions to it than just one, right? So, and not only that, like for differential equations, for example, you can't just solve them linearly. You have to kind of look at it and find this looks like this other model that we know how to solve. Let's see if we can apply that to this and see what happens, right? And sometimes some problems in calculus or math is just, we can just establish that there is a solution and be happy with that. We don't need to know what it is, right? And I think that when we look at the markets and the organizational difficulties that we face, sometimes all we need is like some assurance that based on our experience and what's happening right now and these weak signals and the discontinuities that we see here, it's pretty safe to say that there is a solution, or we're going to make it, but we don't know what that is right now. So let's try these different things. Yeah.
It's like that you read a quote from my book when we started off our discussion. Having the optimism that we could find an answer, I think, is a really important part of this. And many times I see in my client organizations, we see everybody at the project level sitting around for the executive to tell us what to do or to tell us what the answer is. And we don't see that kind of assertiveness, I guess, is the word I'm looking for trying to say, hey, let's figure out what needs to be done. Let's figure out why this is a problem, why we're doing this. Let's find and get the best people we can. Let's figure out what we're going to do, and then we'll get around to figuring out what our timeline looks like. And it's something I tell to project managers all the time, that one of the worst questions that you can ask as a project manager is, when is this due? That instead you want to go towards this why are we doing this kind of thing? And really try to understand the context for the problem that you're working on and the situation that you're working on. So I think there's a lot of organizations wasting a lot of effort into projects that don't really align with where the organization needs to be going. And so having an optimism that we can find our way through this, I think, is a really important idea.
Yeah, another bad question to ask is, what's your budget, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Agreed.
Yeah. So one thing that...
Let me just say this. It goes back to the operational thinking model. If you're working on an operations project designed to work within the business model, the questions of when is this due and what's your budget are much more legitimate questions. But if you know that you are working on a project that's associated with your organization's strategy, budget and timing, they're kind of important, but they're not the first questions that you ask.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tricky too, because sometimes we're personally being evaluated for performance based on these metrics, right? Like, were you behind schedule? And so it's tricky sometimes.
Without a doubt. Yeah. And so that's why I think we need to have more education up and down the organization about what strategy is, what strategic thinking is, how strategy differentiates itself from operations, and to try to build a workforce that can understand that, oh, I'm in an operational thinking mode. I need to think this way. Oh, now I'm putting on my strategic thinking hat, then I need to be able to think this way, and make it okay to have a broader range of acceptable behaviors.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to talk a little bit about data right now because it's such a big topic, and this interconnected world in which people leave digital tracks everywhere about their behavior. We have access to a lot of data, and sometimes it's difficult to make sense of the data. But and I think that everybody understands that. Like I think every company that operates digitally right now, especially, they have access to tons of data, and they have a hard time making sense of it. But I think what I'd like to ask you about is this temptation of, only if we had better data, we couldn't make a decision here, right? So the problem with that I've seen is like, okay, we do have the data. Let's spend some energy to try to make it better data, right? So, and then you go create all these visualizations and filterings and things like that. And then you end up with a nice little graph, and then you see a discontinuity there of some sort, right? And then you'll try to dig into it, and only to realize that there's just so many variables, right? It doesn't matter how good your data is. You can never really pinpoint a correlation that is really, really solid between a trigger and an event. So, do you have any advice for organizations and folks who are in that situation in which they're like, man, I need better data, otherwise I can't make a decision here?
Yeah, 2 or 3 things come to mind quickly. So one, we've already talked about perfectionism, and when people feel threatened, they tend to move towards perfectionism, which says we need more data, which really turns out to be just a big stalling tactic. So I think one of the things that we've got to recognize is that this request for more and more and more data sometimes is really a symptom of fear, of fear of being wrong, and that gets in the way of strategic thinking. Another thing I'd say about data is that, especially when we're talking about accounting artifacts, is that we're backward looking, that we're looking at these artifacts that tell us about some activity that happened in the past. And in strategic thinking, the landmark is the future. And often the kind of data that we're looking at that tells us about the future isn't quantitative, it's qualitative. And if it's qualitative, it means it's hard to come up with a notational representation of that to do something with this. So it's leaning more into, when we get data, if we're talking about numerical kinds of data, to try to lean into that and say, what's the implications? There's 3 micro skills, and we haven't even talked about the micro skills of strategic thinking, which I think is one of the strongest aspects of the book. But here's 3 things that I'd say real quickly. One is we need to understand the micro skill of storytelling and how we use artifacts like data to tell stories. And the important kinds of stories that we're telling are stories about the future. And these stories about the future need to be big enough and roomy enough that people can find a place for themselves within that. So that's one micro skill, storytelling. Another micro skill is anticipation. And anticipation deals with the way that we make assumptions about what's going to happen in the future. What are our hopes? What are our despairs? But this is just a really straightforward question that can be very revealing to you in an organization. The question is, what are your anticipatory assumptions? What do you assume the future to be like? The third micro skill is the micro skill of reframing. So reframing is when we look at data, if you will, or elements or characteristics of a situation, and we say, what other ways could we see that? Could we look at it from a different point of view? And often than that, as we try to reframe and look at things from a different point of view, that's where our minds work, and click, wow, bang, we get an insight. And insights are on this strategic thinking map. And I like to say that insights are the secret sauce of strategy. When I have an executive come to me saying, Greg, here's our strategy, I say, what's the insight behind that strategy? And it can be very revealing. So I think those are three things that I could offer to kind of think about the data. You're absolutely right that it's so true for our world that we're being digitized on everything. The important thing is to figure out what the implications are, what that means for the future of the organization.
Yeah, very good. And micro skills was on my list of questions here because I agree it's very important. But excuse me, before I go there, and just to wrap up on the data conversation here, I saw this comic the other day that it's a dog and puppy. I don't know if you've seen this. So they show a drawing of a puppy, dog at birth, with the short snout and the short legs and the short tail. And then at 8 weeks, it has a little bit longer snout, a little bit longer legs, a little bit longer tail. And then at 20 weeks, a little bit longer snout, longer legs, and longer tail. And then the next square is projected growth based on trend. And basically, it's a dog with like 2 feet long legs and like a 8 feet long tail, and the snout touches the ground, right? So that's one danger I see of just looking at your data instead of just looking outside and, hey, what does an actual dog from the other organization look like, later on in life, and then making an inference. I'm going to share this on the show notes because it's a good one.
Yeah.
Okay, so micro skills, and the way that I like to frame this question is because as we talked about here, learning strategy is not a linear thing, because if you were, then it's not a strategy. Strategy is not linear. And one thing I struggle with as reading is like, okay, I really want to learn more. I really want to think more this way, but where do I start? And you provide these micro skills and even talk about learning them in sequence or having like a cycle of learning these micro skills. I think there are 20 of them. And
yes.
And for me as somebody who wants to take action, that was great because, okay, first one I'm going to pick is curiosity. So I went and got a book on that, and I'm reading that, and it's fascinating. So talk about these micro skills and how important they are and where do they fit in the whole strategic thinking way.
Yeah. So one of the reasons that I think your listeners really should zero in on this micro skills idea is that my experience as a coach says that this is one of the easiest ways for you to get comfortable with strategic thinking, because the book I think is easy to read, but there's a lot of information there. Mm-hmm. And the idea is that there's 20 micro skills that you practice one micro skill per week. You move on to the next one, and then you move on to the next one. And then after the 20 weeks is up, you're back to the first one again. And some weeks you'll do good, and some weeks you won't do so good. But I am convinced that over a period of time that you will develop good habits of mind, that if you practice, especially some of the more difficult ones, you'll start to see the world differently. You'll start to recognize things that maybe deserve some skepticism, or things that are great opportunities that you maybe want to be putting some effort into. And that's called the Ben Franklin technique. Benjamin Franklin, one of the founding fathers of the United States, created a technique that he did something quite similar to this, of practicing one virtue every week. And that's where I picked up the idea from. There's 20 micro skills. Now, something also your listeners, I think, will really be interested in. Most everybody is a member of LinkedIn. And so I created a group on LinkedIn called Practitioners of Strategic Thinking Micro Skills. And this group of people, every week we post one of the 20 micro skills, and that's kind of a group assignment or group beacon, if you will, to say, this is the micro skill that we're going to be focusing on this week. And then you just check in with the group. It pops up in your feed, and it just kind of provides a little reminder to you that this is the week to work on this micro skill. Another tip is I keep a list of the micro skills on my phone, and I just move through them methodically. And the list is ordered exactly as I present them in the book. And again, it's just a kind of a positive reinforcement. It's a good habit to be developing. So the name of that LinkedIn group is, again, Practitioners of Strategic Thinking Micro Skills. And just, go in, apply to become a member, and you're in.
Awesome. Did not know that, and I'm going to join that immediately. And I'm going to put a link to that group in the show notes for the episodes, for people who are listening and can't take notes right now.
Yeah.
Just so people know, kind of have an idea of what this is, can you share maybe 3 or 4 of these micro skills?
Oh, yeah, certainly. Well, you mentioned curiosity early, and that's one of the early ones to take a look at. And everybody knows and understands curiosity. And things that you could do is just go to a search engine and put in curiosity and the industry that you work in. And you will probably find some interesting things. Put in curiosity and your job title, or something that that you're interested in, and you'll find that it just will send you just a whole bunch of stimulating, interesting things that reinforce how important curiosity is. So that's one I mentioned earlier, and I'll just real quickly. Anticipation is how we use the future. That's a micro skill. Reframing is the source of insights, and that's trying to see things in different kind of ways. Storytelling is one of the really cool ones to use, because strategy could be thought of as a story told about power from the perspective of someone in the future. We mentioned a little bit about seeing weak signals. So one of the micro skills is sharpness. Just, disciplining yourself to look for those small discontinuities and weak signals that are out there. On the more difficult side, and this week happens to be for the group, is abductive reasoning. Now, so when we're creating a hypothesis or trying to run an experiment, or we're trying to speculate the future, we're using a process of abductive reasoning. Basically, abductive reasoning is sort of a fancy way to say educated guessing. But strategies then are bets that we're making about the conditions of the future. So abductive reasoning, making better bets, is as a kind of skill that we need to develop to help us try to figure out what's going to be different. And then, you mentioned data. Now we could be curious and go back and look into the data and say, can we find anything within the data that suggests that this might be the case that we want to work on? So there's a few micro skills for you.
That's great. Yeah, in the book, it even you talk about them throughout the book, but then in the end, in one of the appendix, you list them all with a definition, and it's you could even just get that appendix and go through that, and then you'd be a good primer for the rest of the book. Great.
I agree. I think that's something I recommend. I hope people do pick up the book. But that's one of the recommendations I have is first just sort of scan through and see what these 20 micro skills are about. You can find it's really common sense. Then kind of go back and start reading through the book and look through the various real world examples and some of the concepts and things that are laid out there. And you'll find that over time, this will just seep in, and you'll start to see things in a real deeper, more profound, and impactful kind of way.
I couldn't agree more, Greg. There's just so much more to talk about, but let's press pause here. I wanted to I don't know if I think it came across with my energy here today, but I just wanted to reiterate to the listeners how important this book has been for me, and how important I think that these skills are today. In the day and time where people just read headlines and they don't go deeper on things, or they can just ask Google for answers and not be curious and not develop this like a deeper level of being able to go down a vertical path of learning about something or just analyzing something. I think this is really important today, and this book is a great way to kind of
open your mind for different approaches on how to develop these skills. So thank you for writing this. And if people want to learn more about you and what you're doing, where should they go?
Okay. Well, my website is strategicthinkingcoach.com. So that's all one word, strategicthinkingcoach.com. And you can find out more of the things that I'm doing there. For the Project Management Institute, I teach public seminars, and one of the seminars is called How to Think Strategically. And you can find me there. I think you'll find me pretty much all over the web. My Twitter account is at Greg Githens. And if there's something I can do for anybody that's listening personally, if you'd like to just schedule a few minutes for a complimentary chat and just to see what's going on, I'm always happy to do that.
The book is called How to Think Strategically, Sharpen Your Mind, Develop Your Competency, Contribute to Success by Greg Githens. And it's available everywhere. I have a link as well to the Amazon store on the show notes for today's episode. Greg, what a delightful conversation this was. Thank you so much for writing this book and for taking the time for being here with us.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me on, Caesar.
Thank you for listening to the PM for the Masses podcast.
Tune in next week for more great ideas on how to manage your projects better and truly stand out in your industry.
PMforthemasses.com